most of what I am focusing on is the idea that every action that you take as a business owner or a company or a corporation is in some way a communication with various stakeholder groups.
Mm-hmm.
Everything you do is communicating something all the time. It's one of the things that you'll hear a lot when people talk about nonverbal communication. And I tell my students is you cannot not communicate.
Hello and welcome back to UNA Talks. I'm Lee Taylor. I'm your host, and today my guest is Dr. Lindsey Sherrill. Dr. Sherrill is an associate professor of business communication in the Department of Management and Marketing in the Sanders College of Business and Technology. Welcome.
Thank you.
Lindsey, also, we're actually shooting this in the main room, which some people may not know. But and a few years ago, you gave your first TED Talk right in this room, and It was about the true crime podcasting breakout that was happening at the time. And that was my first time getting to know you and who you are. So that was really cool.
Thanks.
And tell us a little bit about, just before we get into your background and all that stuff, tell us a little bit about kind of your focus on that and your book and all this.
That kind of so the TED Talk and the book both came out of my dissertation research. Okay. So while I was dissertating was also when I got super into true crime podcasts, which was right after kind of the serial boom, which is what really hooked me on podcasts.
Oh, sure.
And at the time, there was very little podcast research and almost no true crime podcast research. And so it was a really unexplored area at that time. And I did a lot of convincing of professors that this was a thing worth looking at. And by the time I finished the dissertation, people were like, this is the hottest thing we're all talking about.
You picked a good time to write a book about it, too, I'm sure.
Yeah, and so that's kind of what led to that. It took about 7 years to get there, but that's what led to it.
Very cool. Yeah. Awesome. Well, just such a cool piece of history for you. Well, tell us about how you found yourself at UNA, how you found yourself in the position you're in, and all that good stuff.
Yeah. So I got to UNA kind of by lucky chance. I was on the job market after doing my PhD and was getting a little freaked out. It was getting late, and I saw a posting for a business communication professor in a business school, which is a really unusual thing to say, somebody looking for someone with a communication background. And I was like, this sounds really great. I had actually never visited Florence at the time, despite having a job where most of Alabama had been my territory for years. I'd never been to this corner, and came up here, interviewed, and absolutely fell in love with it. And
awesome.
That's what brought me to UNA.
And what year was that?
That was 2019.
Okay, awesome. So what happened before that? So how did you end up with, we talked about your dissertation.
Yeah.
But what led up to that?
The career story?
Yeah,
okay.
I guess so, yeah.
I've had a really strange, circuitous path to my career story. I actually started in newspapers while I was still in high school, started writing for newspapers. I was columnist, office assistant, typed obituaries for a long time. Typing obituaries led to then doing some sports coverage for the paper I worked for, a very small town paper, that more advanced in South Alabama. And then I ended up being the sports editor for a while still in high school and starting college, and was actually the interim editor for a couple of years. And so I came into college to do my degree in communication with already some of that professional reporter under my belt. But after I graduated with my communication degree, the economy collapsed. We might remember a little bit of that. I ended up falling into a part-time job with wholesale management, working for a wholesale nursery that supplied the garden centers for Home Depot.
Yeah.
And turned out I was pretty good at that part-time job. Ended up spending 10 years doing that for various companies.
Wow.
Over 10 years, and ended up being a district manager.
In wholesale for that?
In wholesale nursery business. All
Cool.
with Home Depot, but different suppliers. And so that was my professional background. And then at that point, I got my MBA, was teaching a couple of classes at night while still working full time just to see if I really liked it. After a year of that, I realized I loved it and decided to take the plunge, quit my job, sell my house, go back to school and do the PhD. And that's how we got here.
Yeah. And then you end up here in 2019 and haven't looked back.
Yeah.
Sounds like good.
Best decision ever made.
Good. Well, we're glad to have you. Yeah. So you and I worked on, the first time I got to really talk with you was helping promote our online BBA program. So tell us a little bit about that program and all of the classes and programs that you're involved with here.
Sure. So the BBA Flex program is our business degree online. It is designed to be a quicker path forward, specifically for working professionals, because it's a lot more flexible than traditional online or in-person classes. They're 8 weeks instead of 16. They're a lot more self-paced and usually a lot smaller classes. So even though it's very self-paced, as a professor, I get to spend a lot of time interacting with those students via email with feedback on their work, because I may only have 10 or 15 of them in that online class. I teach my management communication class for the BBA, which is the main course I teach. I also teach negotiation and conflict management at the undergrad level, and then I teach in our EDBA program for our doctoral students.
Yeah.
And study abroad. So I do a lot of study abroad.
Oh, right. And so have you been traveling this last summer at all? Or
I have actually
Okay.
just got back from Portugal and Spain with 18 students. We spent 15 days, visited Lisbon, Madrid, Sitges, and Barcelona.
Yeah, it sounds miserable.
Oh, awful. Awful. I
Yeah.
had to swim in the Mediterranean. It's
Oh,
terrible.
no,
Just
yeah.
terrible.
Yeah, rotten.
Yeah.
Oh, great. That's very cool. Yeah, our we have so much study abroad here that I'm kind of like always learning about as we move forward. I'm like, I didn't know we were sending people to Portugal and,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then all these other.
Going to South Korea next summer.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah,
Yep.
awesome. So you're involved. There's so many professors like this, and I'm learning more and more, because I usually get to know our professors on a program to program basis. So I sort of associate them like I did with you with one, but they're really kind of all over the spectrum a lot of the time.
Yep.
So you're working with everyone from 18-year-olds to folks who may have just as much experience and in business or higher education as you, but are just entering just now getting their doctorate or whatever.
Oh,
it is.
yeah. I just finished a dissertation committee with someone who is a CIO of a Fortune 100 company that came to our program. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I can help with your grammar, I guess.
Yeah. So, no, that's really cool. So, I love your background is so interesting, because you yourself were working full time, going to class online or going to night classes. And so you've really been in the shoes of a lot of the students that you work with who take classes online. What is it like, being on the other side of that?
It has really taught me to be even more empathetic as a professor than I might have otherwise been.
Yeah.
Because I've been there and I know what it's like to work full time, to have a life and a career and not be a 20-year-old whose job is to go to college while also trying to go to college.
Right.
It makes me a lot more flexible.
Sure, I bet.
Yeah.
What are the goals a lot of the time of our students that, maybe for every level, or maybe the answer is the same for all of them, but what do you feel like is kind of the goal of a student coming into UNA's College of Business? What are they typically looking for?
I think it varies a lot. I think the more traditional students, those 18 to 22-year-olds, even the ones that have a pretty clear career path idea, it's like, I'm going to get this degree and get a job. And at least for those first few years, that's pretty much all they think about. It's not quite as goal-directed. Now, by the time they get to that junior, senior level, the ones I see in the College of Business, a lot of them are a lot more focused. They have decided on an entrepreneurial track, or they're going to get their CPA, and they're a lot more focused. But they're college kids. They're not quite sure. For the non-traditional students, which we have so many of, for most of them, it's a lot more defined. Most of them, I find, already have some kind of career or career entry path, and they see it as, I'm doing really well at this, but I'd like to get promoted. I'd like to make more money, or I'd like to get a graduate degree, and I'm a few classes short. This is a quick path to it.
Yeah. There's always opportunities on the other side that they can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel, and they just kind of need you to help them get there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So our subject at hand is kind of is interesting, where so much of what we talk about, what I get to talk about with our professors, is sort of these multifaceted, multidisciplinary conversations where the beauty of being at a university, right, is that we are sort of all collaborating and pulling from different skill sets, different disciplines, different fields of study to, have a well-rounded student come out the other end of our process and of our education system here. But you have a really unique position in that you're really, like you mentioned, I can help you with your grammar with these EDBA students, right? Like you're really a writer who is working with business students. Yes. So tell us about what that intersection looks like. How do you navigate that? How do you distinguish yourself in that way?
Yeah. So you said it is very interdisciplinary,
Yeah.
and the work that I do is inherently interdisciplinary. And
Sure.
I would argue that business as a discipline is interdisciplinary.
Yeah,
Business ties together from so many different areas of humanities, social science, that it is on its face interdisciplinary.
Well, it intersects with business intersects with in a commercialized society,
Yeah.
right? With all the things that come with that, business overlaps with all human effort,
Yeah.
right? So whenever you're trading, whenever you're communicating, whether trading stocks or information or whatever that is, we're always sort of overlapping with the world at large through the lens of business.
Yes.
So.
And teaching it from a communication standpoint, that is one of the things that I have to emphasize really quickly. I think people they hear a business communication class, and they come into it and they think, we're going to learn to write emails and reports or to give presentations and pitches. Yeah. And it's so much more than that. Most of what I am focusing on is the idea that every action that you take as a business owner or a company or a corporation is in some way a communication with various stakeholder groups. Mm-hmm. Everything you do is communicating something all the time. Mm-hmm. It's one of the things that you'll hear a lot when people talk about nonverbal communication. And I tell my students this, you cannot not communicate. Your silence is saying something, and that is really what I try to emphasize when we're talking about business communication, is that you have to be so aware that you're always storytelling. It's whether you're controlling that narrative or not.
Yeah, and I've heard the same thing about, of course, in marketing, which is what I do, but I've heard the same thing about branding. I think people tend to think of branding as a marketing term, but marketing is really harnessing branding. But branding is always happening, right?
Yeah.
It's like your personal brand or the brand of your company is always being sort of emitted or broadcast to the world. Marketing is how we sort of control it to do what we maybe want, or in communication is how we guide that in the direction that we're hoping to accomplish a certain goal or get something across. Yeah. And so I think the business lens helps us focus that. In the context of the working world, it seems like. So what about just from let's take off the business hat and just put on the liberal arts hat or the fine arts hat or whatever that is. And what about literature sort of opens that world up to a student who's learning that for the first time?
Oh, gosh, that's a really good question. I think one of the biggest things, because this is for me, is definitely how I learn, is to be able to learn to write in different styles. You've got to read them and identify them and to see them. And so the more exposure students have to those different kinds of writing, to the things that they see in their literature classes, their English classes, their political science classes, their psychology classes, they're seeing different styles of writing, different ways to communicate. And reading that and breaking it down helps you integrate that yourself. And I can tell a difference with those students who really get into that. And then when it comes time to write an email to a client, they're thinking like storytellers because they've had that experience. It really does build. There's a reason that those English classes are prereqs for a business communication class. Right.
How do you think, what do you think is happening in that, right? Because clearly I'm not going to write in prose.
Right.
Or I'm going to try to mimic Shakespeare or Walt Whitman or whatever, whatever to my boss if I'm writing them an email. So what are sort of the core tenets that you're helping them extract from maybe what they're learning in English class into a business setting?
Yeah, one of the main things that I focus on that I think is so important for business storytelling, but is also present in any kind of storytelling, is the idea of thinking about your audience analysis. And audience analysis can be that kind of detailed, research-driven kind of analysis that we see in marketing and strategy. But sometimes it's empathy. It's thinking about who is this imaginary audience? How might they think? How might they feel? What are their reactions to this going to be? And that is probably the thing I spend the most time on, because when you start thinking about that, it changes how you phrase your words. It changes the level of language that you use. Am I writing to a general audience where I need to keep this kind of middle school level? Or am I writing to the CEO with a master's degree who's been doing this for 50 years is going to think I'm an idiot if I write it at that low level, right? And I think that crosses over lots of different styles of literature and writing.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you said just about audience, right? I mean, not only so this is more of a copywriting question,
okay?
Which is not necessarily what you're always communicating,
right.
But it certainly applies. What do you think from more in the management, marketing, side of communications? What do you think that students often maybe need the most help in when trying to think about how their words need to affect their recipients in order to maybe persuade them, or maybe to get them to click the button or get them to walk in the store, whatever it is that we're trying to communicate?
Oh, that's a really good question.
It's open-ended too, so sorry, but
I think a big part of it is, again, thinking through that either empathy or research-based knowledge of who this person is,
Sure.
and crafting arguments for them. What do you want to use? What do you want to achieve? So I touch some on persuasive communication, but again, in business communication, it kind of all is. Whether you're selling something, pitching something, it's still persuasion. And so I really do try to get them to focus on that, because I think that is something that is hard for them. It's hard to get past the writer's block. It's hard to think, why is this important, if you can't put yourself in the shoes of the person who's going to be receiving it. Otherwise, it's like I'm just information dumping, and that doesn't help anybody.
How do you apply this because we are in a professional setting as well, right? Every day working at a university. How do you apply these things? What are the principles that you find it helpful to remind yourself of, and best practices for you?
Oh, that's good too. I try to get to know the people that I'm interacting with or communicating with at least somewhat, and to kind of learn what works for them and how to interact with them. And that's true for students. I've learned very quickly that I have students that have different needs and that respond to different kinds of communication differently, especially when we start dealing with international students who come from different cultures where there's different expectations. I've learned that I can't communicate the same way with my students from China as I can from my students from the U.S. or Canada or Germany, or pick another country, because the expectations are just different. They're less likely to challenge me, for example, because that is just such a cultural norm that you don't question a professor, that they won't tell me if they don't understand. And so I have to learn to go a little deeper. And so I try to apply that to my other interactions as well.
Yeah, you have such a... you're talking about like kind of knowing your audience, but your audience is really broad.
Very much
you're dealing with just people from not only different, backgrounds or like age, different ages and stuff, but different locations, different, there's cultural variabilities, and that's a lot to navigate. So I'm sure you have to I'm sure it keeps you on your toes, even as a professional communicator.
Absolutely. Yeah. It is always evolving and something to figure out. And sometimes I mess up.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying our conversation with Dr. Sherrill. I know I am. I wanted to, first of all, thank UNA for sponsoring this podcast, but also I wanted to point you to una.edu/online. That's where you're going to find out about all of our online classes, like our online BBA and MBA, like that Dr. Sherrill teaches in, and other programs that we have. But we have so many different programs here at the university that can help you accomplish your goals or engage your curiosity. So I want you to visit that page, learn about our scholarships, and other opportunities that we have with partnerships, things like that. You can also talk to a recruiter, talk to a program coordinator, get in contact with us through that page and ask us all the questions. We're here for it. So go to that page and check that out. And also follow us on Facebook, Instagram. LinkedIn, X, formerly known as Twitter, and YouTube to keep up with all the cool things we have going on at campus and online. And now we'll get back to our conversation with Lindsey Sherrill. So as it pertains to, we talked a little bit about literature and how students, can take what they're learning in their English classroom or in any of their classrooms and apply it to the business world, because the business world is really just the lens by which we experience our daily lives in a lot of ways. What about storytelling? So why is it important, I think, for students who are, know that they want to enter into the working world and be good communicators? Where does storytelling really fit into that and understanding those elements?
Yeah. So I can think of a pretty simple example that I use in class. One of the things that I spend a lot of focus on is kind of what we would call in the communication world framing of your story. What is the angle that you take? What do you want your audience to take away from your narrative, the main takeaways? And part of that is discussing different approaches to storytelling. So, for example, if something's time sensitive, do I get to the main point faster? Do I use a direct approach to get there? Or is this something that needs a little convincing? Should I be more indirect and build my evidence first, kind of convince you before I get to that unpopular idea? Or is this something that's just information sharing? Can we use what is called a journalistic approach, where we answer that where, when, why, who, how questions? And so those are kind of the approaches that I use in a business communication class for students. And the advantages of those is they're pretty easy to navigate. That even if you're not a great writer, if you're not someone who's super creative, who's into the storytelling, you can navigate those. You can work with those, and we practice those in class with things like writing an email, the same email to the same person, using each of those approaches to see how it changes the overall feel, that framing of it, what the overall impressions you give are. And I do a lot of exercises like that with really simple things, because I think that using those simple things makes it easier for them to build their arguments when we get into more advanced kind of pitches, reports, etc.
Yeah, so walk me through just like a quick example of an exercise like that. So you're basically sitting your students down at their laptops and saying, all right, we're going to ask our boss to move a meeting, or what's the prompt, I guess?
An example that we work through in class, and I have them kind of respond, we write it on the board together, is that you work in customer service at a local boutique. You've got a long-time customer who has sent you a message that she bought a product, curtains for her bathroom, and within days of hanging them there, the dye drained out, the colors look weird, they look terrible, and she's so angry. How do we respond? And we go through it with multiple scenarios. First thing we do, we look at with a product that she bought, so we understand the background, and we see, she shouldn't have hung these in the bathroom. This is just user error. What do we do? So I asked them to approach it with, you're allowed to give a refund. Now, how do you approach this? And so in that case, we'd use a direct approach, right? She wants a refund and some help. You can say yes. So you say, I'm so sorry this happened. Yes, I can help you. And then we walk through the steps of what you'd need to do to return. That's pretty simple. Direct approach, straight to it.
Yeah.
But then I throw in a wrench.
Not allowed to give out a discount?
Can't give her a refund.
Oh, man.
What do we do?
Killer. Yeah.
Oh, and we also talk about who this customer is. We may not know a lot about her, but I tend to use a pretty stereotypical older woman name. I won't use it here. And I'll say, we know she's been a customer here for 45 years. So we can make some assumptions about who this person is. So we can't give a refund. What do we do? Well, this time we're probably going to need to use an indirect approach, because she's not going to be happy. We kind of ease in, thank you for being a valuable customer. We know this is frustrating. And then we try to offer her some options otherwise. Like, I can't refund you for this, but if you'll come in, I can help you find a product that does meet your needs. We can make sure this doesn't happen again. Maybe there's a discount we can offer. And we walk through all those different complications. And so after we write this together, I will start asking them, okay, so what if she says this? What if the response is this? What if I don't have the power to give a discount? What do I do? And we talk through those different scenarios, those different kind of stories.
Yeah.
And I think, how would this play out? And I use a lot of things like that.
Yeah.
And get more complicated as we go along.
Yeah. It's that communications angle of sort of, how do I use the promises in my tool belt to, appease this, but you don't completely lean on that. Your words are still going to have impact. And then because if you take that away and all you have is your words, you still have to accomplish the same goal. Like, that's a really great obstacle. You mentioned earlier whenever you finished your, I believe it was whenever you finished your master's, and it was like recession time right there.
Well, it was after my undergrad.
Yeah. So that was actually me too.
Yeah.
That's right. So I finished my undergrad right around the same time, and I found myself in customer service because I needed a job and found a really good one, which I was fortunate. But I was dealing face to face with with customers, and I had not really had the same training. It sounds like your students, or I hadn't intentionally maybe taken the communication courses that would have been a little bit helpful for me to navigate the business world. And I'm having to look down the barrel of like customers who are pretty irate and pretty frustrated about things like all the time, and I felt like I'm a pretty disarming person, but I was like, this is a whole new territory. So just conflict resolution in of itself could be a whole course, it seems like.
It is, and I teach it.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, great. Maybe I should sign up for it.
Conflict management. Yeah.
Conflict management. Yeah. Well, that's like kind of the point of communication a lot of the time in the business world. What other courses other than just, sort of these resolution tactics, what other course material is sort of involved that sticks out to you?
For the conflict resolution class, one of the big major things that I focus on in it is also the intercultural communication aspects of conflict, because there are such cultural differences in how people outwardly respond to conflict and what is normal, what is acceptable. One big example of that is how apologies are treated differently in different cultures. One example that we talk about in class that's in our textbook is looking at differences between CEO or corporate apologies in the U.S. versus in Japan, which is a really interesting cultural example, because Japan is a culture where face saving, not embarrassing yourself, is extremely important, which makes you think there wouldn't be a lot of public apologies, because that would be admitting you messed up, losing that face. But what we see is that they're actually a lot more open with corporate apologies than the U.S. because the litigation ecosystem is different. And so companies are very careful in the U.S. because of being sued, legal liabilities, but the apologies don't come with quite as much of that in this other culture. And so you see this clash of like business regulations versus cultural differences. That's probably one of the most interesting things in that class is the cultural aspect.
As our world becomes more multicultural, you're going to see those influences fluctuate and stuff. I mean, I'm sure you still see a lot of the same, but not because you're not the only person interacting with people. I mean, we're all doing business internationally and communicating internationally, and just one or two generations in now, we really find ourselves in kind of a complicated ecosystem of language here. So
and one of the most interesting things looking at intercultural communication and just culture in general is that we've seen over time that despite how global we are, despite how interconnected we are, cultural differences don't really go away, just like regional language differences don't go away. They are very entrenched in human society, no matter how much connection you have. So it makes sense to understand them and that spectrum and what that means when you're interacting.
How much of this did you experience? Because you said you worked 10 years at Home Depot. How much of your experience in that space, constantly dealing in communication and a lot of negotiations and a lot of back and forth and a lot of, I'm sure, conflict resolution. How do you see yourself applying that to the classroom?
I use a lot of that because I think it can be tough for students to understand where they're going to apply this in their day-to-day life. And so I use a lot of examples of where my communication skills gave me a leg up in my job. Everything from being the one that got extra opportunities because I could write training materials or be involved in things, but also in the day-to-day. One of the things that I tell, especially my conflict negotiation students, is that I used to joke that the main point of my job as a manager was mediation. I spent most of my time as either a mediator or a therapist for clients or employees who were bumping heads on something. That's what I did. I would show up at the store in their district and be like, how do I make this Home Depot manager and my employee who's bringing in our products, how do we make them get along? How do I smooth this over and make everybody happy? And I use a lot of examples from that time in my classes.
What do you think makes somebody, maybe it's a core value of yourself or a core tenet of your personality, but what do you think makes, somebody really well equipped for that in that kind of role? Like what is kind of the core factor? What of that is maybe comes naturally, and what of that just has to be taught no matter who you are?
I don't know that it comes naturally for me. I think it is something I learned over a long time, and a lot of mistakes in that experience. One of the things that I focus on a lot when teaching the conflict management is we look at how our understanding of conflict is very much tied to our upbringing, our childhood, our families, our cultures, and really look at how do you feel about conflict? What do you think when you think of conflict? What are words that come to mind when you think about conflict? And really getting at that idea of, do you see it as something that's inherently negative? Do you see this as an opportunity for growth? Do you see this as an opportunity for compromise? How can we turn this from something that we think of as completely negative into something that is, if not positive, at least neutral, an opportunity for growth? And so a huge part of teaching it for me is getting people to examine those underlying ideas and to think back to why do I feel this way about it? Why do I have this emotional reaction to this? Why do I go straight to anger? Why do I get overwhelmed? Why do I want to cry? Or what? Versus, okay, how can I recognize this is a feeling and this is separate than our facts of what we're going to work through? And so that's a big part of teaching it is really breaking down kind of those understandings of conflict that we have internally that we may not even realize that we have.
Yeah, and I'm sure that you will, if you don't learn that in the classroom, you learn it the hard way in a business setting where the stakes are oftentimes pretty high.
Yeah, especially, and in the business world, often it means realizing it's not personal. That this conflict may personally involve me, but it's not necessarily personal. So how can I take the emotion out of this and get back into this kind of logical, sensible way to do this?
And it sounds like you take the emotion out of it by acknowledging that it's there.
Yeah, exactly.
When you feel it, you have to just say all right, I'm upset. Where's that coming from? But then how do I move forward?
Right.
And not act out of that.
See, it's therapy. Right?
I mean, I'm here for it. Yeah, I'm here to learn for sure. Yeah. This is just free therapy for me all day long with all of you guys. Yeah,
when you acknowledge a feeling, then you can decide what to do with it, right? Instead of being overwhelmed.
And we don't think about that. I think whenever we think somebody who's getting their business degree, that there's not a navigating your emotions 101. Maybe there should be, with every college curriculum, but that's kind of going back to the humanities, right?
Yeah.
And learning communication and learning literature, learning some of these the core principles and core tenets of just how society works.
Yeah.
And we bring that into our businesses. We bring that into our organizations to have more effective outcomes.
Right.
Right. And so how can we do that without knowing how to use our words? Because what else are we doing it with? Our decisions and our words, right?
Yeah.
So how do you help students maybe see the value in that? If there's resistance there, or if those dots aren't easy to connect for somebody, what are some approaches that you take maybe to help students kind of see the value in that who may overlook it?
Yeah, so one of the things that we try to emphasize in the College of Business, particularly in early classes, it used to be in the business communication class, but now we have a whole separate course that they take earlier in their career, is a focus on what we call professional presence. So how you present yourself, who you are in the workplace, out of the workplace, what is the story of you are presenting about yourself at all the time. And a big part of that is improving your emotional intelligence. And that is one of the things that I continue to push as we're writing. Again, it's that empathy piece. It's the being able to put yourself in other people's shoes and to recognize why you're making the decisions that you're making. Some of the things that I do in my classes is we do a lot of readings related to that. I have some readings that I pull in just to kind of get them thinking. There's a piece that was published, maybe the Chronicle of Higher Ed 10 years ago or so, called Why Being a Better Writer Can Make You a Better Person. And the whole idea is because being a good writer forces you to have to think about empathy and forces you to have to put yourself in other people's shoes. And so we start with that sometimes, and then we talk through those. Did I answer that question?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. I think so. And kind of zooming back in a little bit, just or maybe zooming out.
Okay.
Whichever one makes the most sense, I guess. What is it about? I guess what is it about the business world, and somebody who's entering into, we'll just call it like a professional environment. Which could be anything nowadays, like a nonprofit or
Right.
a college or university, or of course a business itself. What is it about that invites so much conflict? That I think, and that students are, without this kind of class setting or without these scenarios, that they're underprepared for.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is that business is inherently tied to your ego, right? When you're talking about money, success, all of those things are so tied to your ego that brings in conflict immediately, because you've got clashing egos, and that's a big part of it.
What is different about the business world than the world that, let's say, an undergrad, right? Like an 18 to 22-year-old who's in one of your classes, because your MBA students and your EDBA students and a lot, that's where they are every day. They no context needed, right?
Yep.
Maybe some help is needed for sure, and some instruction and some perspective. But for a student who's maybe never even had a job, what are some of the conflicts that arise that they're not prepared for unless they really sit and think about this?
I mean, I think one of the most basic ones is just working collaboratively with other people, right? If you ask an undergrad, they're going to tell you they hate group work. They don't want to do group work because some people want to take all the credit. Some people don't pull their weight, all of those things. It's the same thing in the business world. Studies have shown that the number one reason people get fired from their very first job is they don't know how to work with other people. They don't know how to get along with them, which is why group work is such a big part of business classes. And I think that's hugely important. And we see that in business conflicts, is people don't know how to work with others because we just don't practice it a lot outside of maybe team sports growing up or the low stakes groups project. And then people really don't know how to collaborate.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier that, business is inherently tied to ego.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, because it's tied to, we get a lot of identity out of our performance and out of our success and out of our failures. Yeah. That, it takes a long time. I think it takes a lot of maturity to not let that affect you personally.
Absolutely.
And you can be really emotionally mature and still have a hard time with that.
Absolutely.
So somebody who's entering into that space for the first time is going to need that equipment to help navigate through not only their own frustrations, but to recognize the frustrations of others and realize what that's kind of attached to and be aware of it.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons that when we're talking about something as simple as writing your cover letter, your resume, the most basic kind of business communication, is to really think about those kind of things that are inherently part of who you are and your skill set outside of a particular job or a particular situation. And I think that can be helpful for navigating those things when you do have those failures, those crushing moments in your career that we all have at some point, to realize, like, I still have these skills. I can still do these things. This one moment doesn't define me. And I think starting those conversations when they are just entering their career is important.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying our conversation. I just wanted to take a quick break to thank UNA for sponsoring this podcast, but also to point you toward una.edu/online. That's where you're going to find out about all of our online programming, all of our really cool degrees that you can get, all the great things you can learn here on the web with UNA. So make sure and visit that website. You can talk to our recruiters, our program coordinators, really anybody you need to get the information you're looking for. And also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, X, and LinkedIn and YouTube. Just always want to throw that reminder out to our listeners and our viewers. So thank you guys for hanging out, and we will get back now to our conversation with Dr. Sherrill. So, you're helping students navigate communicating in the business world at all levels. What are you looking for, like whenever a student comes in and they are open to the guidance of what they need to learn to, navigate all of these really complicated situations with language, what is the thing that you're looking for? What's like the first indicator of success that they're understanding sort of some of the principles that you're trying to impart to them?
Let me think. I know one of the first assignments that I have, that's a big assignment in class, is a cover letter. And by the time they do that, we've talked a lot about these presenting your skills and also things like thinking about what your audience wants. They've told you, right? If you're applying for a job, they've given you a list of keywords, what they're looking for, and you're essentially selling yourself. So when I see somebody go into a cover letter and not just use ChatGPT or a template or be real boring, but they're able to say, like, I am entry level at this job, but let me tell you about these other things I've done that match exactly what you want. And I can see that they're really thinking more broadly.
They're talking to their audience.
Yeah, they're thinking interdisciplinarily. They're thinking about what their audience wants. They're thinking about their professional presence.
Yeah.
Something that simple is a place where I can see all of these things coming together, as well as things like critical thinking, that they're working through this. And it's one of the reasons that as much as people hate writing cover letters, I think it's probably one of the most important things I can do in this class, because it forces you to use all of those skills in a very concise, very well edited, very direct sort of way.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned, not using ChatGPT or whatever, and this is a conversation that everyone is having,
right.
Because especially whenever it comes to writing and communicating, because a lot of people, that's the first thing that they tend to go to, is they say, I want this tool to do my communicating for me. And maybe it's an obvious answer, but where's the pitfall there? Like, where can that go wrong? I can't imagine where that could. But where do you? I think what that teaches us, I guess, I can tee this up and say, what that teaches us is that this is a stressful thing that people want to outsource, but why resist that? And in a nutshell, why resist that? Why should we learn to do that for ourselves and not outsource that?
Yeah, I think a huge part of it is that even when you get a pretty decent result from a generative AI, it just lacks that humanness, humanity. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not thinking about that audience the same way you are. It does not have the empathy, the emotional intelligence. It doesn't know you and your style. And even if you go back and you edit it and you play with it and it's learned and it's trained, it's never going to quite be you. Now, that doesn't mean there's not a place for those tools. There's great uses for those tools. They're great brainstorming tools. I have certainly used them for panel questions, outlines, absolutely. And they can be great editing tools. But I think when you rely completely on it, you miss so much of those elements of what makes us human and what makes it effective.
Well, especially in a world that's increasingly like all of our communication is digital, tonality, word choice, punctuality, or punctuation rather. All of these things make we're really leaning on them and resting on them to do a lot of work for us that we can't do with our faces if we're not going to be sitting and talking with that person. So it's like increasingly important that we know how to use our words. So how do you do that? Because so much of what you're doing is online. You're doing we're talking about a lot of classroom examples, it sounds like, but I know you're also teaching online.
Yeah.
So how do you sort of code switch a little bit from the classroom to teaching online, and then how do you help your students do the same?
Yeah. I love teaching online because I know this is shocking for someone who teaches writing. I feel like I'm much better in written form. And so I really like the ability to be able to write it, to think about it, to edit it. And I also use a lot of videos because, again, I think that personal part matters. They feel like your students feel like they know you when they see you. They hear your voice. They see that I talk with my hands and hit microphones. That helps a lot. But I do try to focus on things like tonality and how that comes across differently. One of the things that I've talked about with students and that I definitely think is the case is when you look at good writers, they don't always follow the rules. They do weird punctuation things. They make up words. They use a sentence that might technically be a run-on, but it makes perfect sense. And I try to emphasize that you got to know the rules before you can break them, because then you can break them strategically, right? Then you know when to use your ellipsis and your punctuation and your funny little things that make your writing yours. But you can't really do that until you know you know the rules.
Yeah.
Right.
What part of your students' success do you feel like, you sort of have ownership of, right? You'll obviously never take credit for, somebody being successful in their career.
Right.
You obviously won't be like, you're welcome.
Yeah.
But, what part of their success do you, feel like you were specifically guiding them through, and that you kind of have that ownership of that part of it?
I think a big part of it is opening their eyes to possibilities, that your career is not necessarily a straight track, and what you think you're going to be doing today, it's probably not what you're going to end up doing. But what you learn today will absolutely be a part of what you end up doing. And that is definitely something I try to emphasize to them on a personal level in class with my own stories, and to help them integrate. And I have students who have come back later after graduation saying, I remember things you told me about empathy or understanding an audience, or taking that moment to figure out what's the internal psychology that's making me interact that way. I still think about that, and I use that every day, even though I'm now doing this totally different thing. And so I feel a lot of pride taking ownership in that even if it's just that making them think a little harder.
Yeah. What part of you? I'm doing maybe a Quentin Tarantino here. I'm bouncing around the timeline. I'm all over the place.
That's okay.
But I'm going back to kind of when you discovered you wanted to be a teacher, right?
Yeah.
After being in this position for a really long time, and then you get your master's and you start teaching, and you find yourself like, ooh, what did that unlock necessarily? And then how do you feel like you get to exact whatever that unlocked every day? Like, what was that? What is that specifically that you just enjoy so much about it?
I would say that it was not even when I finally got to the teaching part, because it's something I've kind of always known I wanted to do. I'm the oldest of four, so I guess kind of I've always been teaching somebody. But I have always kind of ended up falling into roles that involve teaching or training. And I think a lot of it is that I am good with words, and I'm good at explaining things in different ways to different people. That is something that comes pretty naturally to me. I come from a family of teachers, so that was also modeled to me.
Yeah. Also probably part of the resistance of not wanting to be one for a little while. That tends to happen too. Yeah.
I always knew I wanted to be in higher ed, but I didn't know what that would be.
Yeah,
and then my career went other directions. And so coming back to the faculty side was definitely not always in the plan.
Cool.
Yeah, but I always just kind of end up in roles that were that. I did a huge amount of training in my business world when I was waiting tables, bartending off and on. Over time, I always ended up being a trainer. I've just always gravitated to those teaching roles. And so when I actually got into a college classroom for the first time, and started interacting with students and really seeing that feedback, seeing their reactions, watching them grow over the course of a semester, that was super exciting.
Yeah.
The second semester that I did that, I taught a public relations class, and their final projects, they had to create some kind of campaign for a company that was having some kind of crisis or issue. And I had a group of students who produced an ad for Uber, who was having some kind of major issues at the time. It was early Uber days. I don't remember exactly what it was.
Yeah.
That was so good that we really debated if we should have sent it to Uber. And unsurprisingly, I believe one of those students is now a professor herself. She teaches digital media. Another's a newspaper editor. Another does what you do for another school.
Okay,
and
cool.
so it's like watching that blossom was amazing.
Yeah, and like you said, they'll come back to you and say, I never thought I'd be doing this, but look at me now. And sort of like you, right? Like all of our journeys sort of end up taking us. But that's kind of the beauty of these interdisciplinary studies and these ideas that we sort of share across the university, and that I think we do a good job of embracing that, and understanding that all of these things sort of touch one another, and there's value in their interactions and in their approaches to one another, because a business student needs to understand humanities students need to understand how those things apply in the business world. It's
Absolutely.
just important to be that, and you've kind of done this and you're not only in your career but academically, it seems like. What is your ultimate hope for your students, that not just that they come back to you and say, I did this and I did this.
Yeah.
Like, what is your ultimate hope for them and their journey and how they use what you teach them?
My ultimate hope for them is that they are successful in whatever way that means for them, because that's going to be different for all of them, how they define success, and that they carry forward to that success in an ethical way that makes the world a better place and leaves them satisfied. That is my goal for them.
Cool. Yeah, that's as good a goal as any teacher can have for their students, I think. So maybe that's what we're all after at the end of the day.
Yep.
So very cool. Well, this has been super fun, Lindsey. Thank you so much
Thank
for your
you.
time. I really appreciate you following me around into some of these conversations and these wacky questions and stuff, but you did a great job. So thanks for helping us think about all that
Absolutely. Thanks
stuff.
for having me.
And thank you guys for watching and listening and for being a part of this project. And we hope to see you again soon here at UNA Talks. Thanks.